David's innocent errand sparks doubt in Lena's heart when she finds condoms in his bag. A surprising twist reveals hidden truths, testing their love and trust. Will their marriage survive the storm, or is this the end? Hello, family. Welcome to Storytime Mutually. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Lena and David had always been a perfect match, or so she believed. Their marriage had weathered its fair share of storms, but they had always emerged stronger. They were best friends, partners in everything. From the moment David had proposed to her 7 years ago, Lena had never doubted their love. It was the kind of love that felt safe, unbreakable. Or at least, that's what she thought. David was an architect, a quiet and thoughtful man who always seemed to know exactly what Lena needed before she said it. Lena was a creative soul, running her own small art gallery in their charming little town. They had always found balance in their differences. She loved his calm demeanor, the way he listened, the way he could make everything seem right. He loved her spontaneity, her laughter that filled their home with light, her ability to find beauty in everything. But one quiet afternoon, Lena's world began to crumble. David had just told her that he was going on a business trip with his boss, Mr. Peters. It was a big opportunity for David, a project that could elevate his career. Lena was proud of him, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease as the days leading up to his trip passed by. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was something else. Something in the air felt different. That afternoon, she decided to pack David's bag for him. She knew he was busy, and as a loving wife, she wanted to make sure he had everything he needed. As she neatly folded his shirts, placed his toiletries in the corner, and zipped up the suitcase, her fingers brushed against something small and unfamiliar at the side of his bag. She paused, wondering what it was. Curiosity stirred within her, and with trembling hands, she pulled it out. A small box. Her heart skipped a beat as she stared at the box. It wasn't what she expected at all. She hesitated, her breath shallow, and opened the box. Inside were condoms. The sight of them sent a wave of shock and confusion through her. She couldn't breathe for a moment. Why would David need these? She felt a sharp pang in her chest. Her mind raced. Had he been hiding something from her? The room seemed to close in on her as the possibilities began to spiral in her mind. Was he seeing someone else? The thought was unbearable, but it was there, gnawing at her. She thought about the late nights at work, the way he sometimes seemed distant, lost in his thoughts. But she quickly shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. No, she knew David. He wouldn't do that. Or would he? She felt her hands tremble as she clutched the box, staring at it as if it were a piece of shattered glass. What was she supposed to do now? Her stomach twisted in knots, and her heart felt as though it was being squeezed. Lena had always prided herself on their open communication, but now, standing there with that small box in her hand, she didn't know where to begin. Her mind tried to make sense of the situation, but it felt impossible. She tried to remind herself that this could be a misunderstanding, a simple mistake, but the fear gnawed at her. What if there was someone else? What if all this time, she had been blind to the signs? As David came home that evening, Lena was sitting in the living room, the small box resting in front of her. Her hands were clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain calm. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't let this go unanswered. When David walked in, his face lit up with a smile. "Hey, beautiful," he said, brushing a kiss against her cheek. But Lena couldn't bring herself to smile back. She simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the small box on the table. David paused, noticing the tension in the air. His smile faltered slightly. "Lena? What's going on?" Lena took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I found something today, David. Something in your bag." David's expression immediately shifted, his eyes widening in alarm. What? What did you find?" Without a word, Lena pushed the box across the table toward him. "This." David's face went pale, and for the first time, Lena saw him hesitate. He swallowed hard, his eyes flickering between the box and her face. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. Lena's heart was racing. She could barely stand to look at him, but she couldn't look away either. She needed answers. David, what is this? Why would you need these? You're going on a business trip. Why would you bring condoms? David's eyes filled with guilt, and he sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time, but Lena could tell he was struggling to find the right words. Lena, I didn't want you to find out this way, he started, his voice strained. I didn't know how to tell you. Lena's eyes narrowed. Tell me what, David? What's going on? David let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping. Lena, I bought those for Mr. Peters. He asked me to pick them up before the trip. Lena's confusion only deepened. What do you mean? Why would you buy condoms for your boss? David's face flushed with embarrassment, and he looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Mr. Peters? He's been going through some personal stuff. He's been struggling with his marriage, and he's been really stressed about this trip. A couple of the guys at work joked about it, and he asked me to buy them for him. I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just a stupid request, but he's been a good boss, and I didn't want to make things awkward. So, I picked them up. Lena sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what he had just said. The shock was too much. For his boss? She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Here she was, imagining the worst possible scenario, when the truth was even more ridiculous than she could have imagined. David, why didn't you tell me? She whispered, her voice barely audible. David's eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to make you upset. I thought it was nothing. But now, seeing the hurt in your eyes, I wish I had just been honest from the start. I'm so sorry, Lena. I never meant to cause you any pain. Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, and she shook her head. I was so scared, David. I didn't know what to think. I thought I was losing you. Her voice cracked, the pain she had been holding back spilling out. You've always been my everything. I didn't know if I could handle the thought of you not loving me anymore. David's face softened, and he reached for her hands, his touch gentle but urgent. Lena, I love you. You are everything to me.
Please believe me.
I never meant for you to feel this way. I'm so sorry I let you down. Lena looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity, the pain in them. She could feel his regret, his fear of losing her. And though the situation had been a misunderstanding, the fear they both felt was real. She wiped away her tears and squeezed his hand. I love you too, David. And I know you never wanted to hurt me, but you have to promise me that you'll never hide things from me again. We're a team, and we should be able to face anything together. David nodded, his voice filled with emotion. I promise. No more secrets. As they sat together, Lena realized something. It wasn't about the condoms or the misunderstanding. It was about the love they shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was theirs. That night, as they held each other, Lena felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in days. They had been through a storm, but they were still standing together, stronger than ever. The night had settled in, and after the intense conversation with Lena, David had drifted off to sleep. His exhaustion from the long day weighed heavily on him, and as much as he wished he could stay awake and continue reassuring Lena, his body finally gave in to rest. But as they lay on the bed, her phone buzzed beside the bed, cutting through the calm of the night. Lena, who had been restless for hours, was still lying wide awake. The phone buzz was enough to snap her out of her thoughts. She turned to see David sound asleep beside her. She picked up her phone hesitantly, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the name flashing on the screen. It was her friend, Sarah. Lena pressed the phone to her ear, her voice soft but full of concern.
Hey, Sarah.
What's up? She whispered. There was a brief pause on the other end, and then Sarah's voice came through, urgent and filled with hesitation. Lena, I'm sorry to call so late, but I think you need to know something. I don't want to cause trouble, but I saw David today. I saw him at that new Italian restaurant in town with a woman. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She could hear the familiar panic rising in her chest. A woman? Where?
Why?
Sarah, are you sure it was him? Lena's voice wavered, as she fought to remain calm. Yes, I'm sure. It was him, Lena, Sarah replied, a little more confident now. They were having lunch together and they seemed really cozy. I didn't want to judge, but I thought you should know. Lena felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Lunch? That wasn't what she had imagined. Her mind raced with questions, and she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal.
Who was she?
What was going on? She thanked Sarah quickly, but as she hung up, the weight of her thoughts began to crush her. It felt like the ground was slipping out from under her, and she needed answers. Now. She turned to look at David, who was fast asleep beside her. His peaceful face made her feel guilty, but she couldn't ignore the doubts swirling in her heart. She needed to confront him, and she needed to do it right away. Lena shook David gently, her voice trembling as she spoke. David, wake up. David stirred, groggily opening his eyes, clearly surprised by the urgency in her voice.
Lena?
What's wrong? He asked, his voice heavy with sleep. Lena sat up, her hands shaking as she held her phone. I just got a call from Sarah. She saw you today at the restaurant with a woman. Who is she, David? What's going on? David's eyes widened in alarm as he pushed himself up to sit. He had expected this moment, but the shock and fear were still evident in his expression. Lena, I swear, it's not what you think. Lena's eyes narrowed, and she shook her head. Then who is she, David? Who is she? David sighed deeply, his face full of frustration and regret. Her name is Claire. She's my colleague from work, the one I'm paired with for the business trip. She's the financial manager for the project we're working on. We were discussing the trip, going over the budget and the financial details. Lena stared at him, her emotions a storm of confusion, hurt, and anger. David, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you mention her? I've been sitting here, thinking the worst, and you let me. I should have told you, Lena. I know, David interrupted, his voice filled with remorse. I was trying to protect you from worrying. I didn't want you to think there was anything going on between us, and I was too embarrassed to bring it up. I'm sorry. Lena shook her head, her voice trembling. But why didn't you just tell me from the start? Why leave me in the dark? It hurts, David. I thought. Before she could finish, David reached for her hands, holding them gently. I never wanted to hurt you, Lena. I swear. There's nothing between me and Claire. I love you, and only you. I'm so sorry for not being open with you. Lena took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the uncertainty still lingered in her heart. I need to know the truth, David. I can't just let this go. David looked at her, his eyes pleading. I understand, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. I'll call my boss, Mr. Peters. He can explain everything. He was the one who asked me to get the condoms, and I think hearing it from him will help you understand. Lena nodded slowly, still unsure but feeling a tiny bit of relief. She needed the truth. She needed to know, once and for all, that David wasn't hiding anything from her. The next morning, David woke early and dialed his boss's number. When Mr. Peters answered, David quickly explained the situation. Mr. Peters, I need you to help me. Can you come over and talk to Lena? She's upset, and I need you to clarify everything. Mr. Peters agreed, and within the hour, he was at their door. David greeted him at the door, and together they walked into the living room, where Lena was waiting. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Turner, Mr. Peters began, his voice sincere. I never meant for any of this to cause you any distress.
I need to clarify something.
David didn't buy the condoms for himself. I asked him to get them for me. I've been having some personal issues, and I didn't want to make things awkward, but I thought you should know. Lena looked at him, trying to process the information. It made sense, but it still stung. But what about the woman he was seen with? Sarah saw him with her at the restaurant. Mr. Peters sighed, clearly aware of the tension in the room. The woman is Claire, like David said. She's a colleague of his. They're working together on this project, and she's the financial manager. The two of them are strictly business. There's no other relationship between them. I can assure you of that. Lena took a deep breath, her mind slowly beginning to clear. She had heard the words, but part of her still struggled to believe them. She looked at David, who was standing by her side, watching her closely. "I needed to hear that from you," Lena said quietly, her voice a little shaky. "But I want you to promise me, David, no more secrets. No more lies. We're in this together. You have to be honest with me, always." David nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I promise, Lena. No more secrets." Lena looked at Mr. Peters, who had been patient throughout the whole ordeal. "Thank you for coming over, Mr. Peters. I know this wasn't easy for either of you. I just needed to be sure." Mr. Peters smiled warmly, nodding. "I understand, and I'm glad everything is cleared up now. I truly apologize for any stress this caused." Finally, Lena believed him. David was telling the truth. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty. "I trust you, David," she said softly. "But I need you to understand how much this hurt. I love you, and I want us to move forward, but you have to promise me that you'll never keep things from me again." "I promise," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you, Lena. Always." As David left for the business trip the next morning, Lena's heart was lighter. She knew that their relationship had been tested, but the love between them was unbreakable. And though she still carried the scars of that difficult time, she knew they would heal. Weeks later, when David returned from his business trip, he was a changed man. The trip had been a success, far beyond what he had hoped. The project he had been working on had secured a significant deal, and the money they made from it would set them up for years to come. David was excited to share the good news with Lena, but more than that, he was eager to prove to her that the trust they had lost could be rebuilt. Lena was at the airport, waiting for him with a smile on her face. When she saw him walking toward her, her heart swelled with joy. He was home, and everything was going to be okay. That night, they sat together, talking about the future, about the dreams they shared. The pain of the past was still there, but it was fading. In its place was a new hope, a new beginning. As the months passed, things continued to improve. They grew closer than ever, and as their love deepened, they were blessed in ways they hadn't expected. A year later, Lena found out she was pregnant. After years of trying, they were finally going to have a child. Their journey had been difficult, but it had strengthened their bond. They had faced fears, doubts, and misunderstandings, but in the end, they emerged stronger. Together, they knew they could face anything. With God's blessings, they were finally going to become the family they had always dreamed of. And as they looked toward the future, David and Lena knew one thing for certain. Their love, tested and tried, was now unbreakable. They were ready to face the rest of their lives together, hand in hand, as husband and wife. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Kindly leave a comment on what you feel about the story, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories. Thanks for watching.